Mr. President.
The Senator from Connecticut.
We need a quorum call.
We are not.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 36B of the Arms Export Control Act, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from further consideration of S.J. Res. 53 as provided under the previous order.
The Senator from Connecticut, Mr. Murphy, moves to discharge S.J. Res. 53, joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed foreign military sale of the Government of Qatar of certain defense articles and services from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Connecticut.
Pursuant to Section 36B of the Arms Export Control Act, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from further consideration of S.J. Res. 54 as provided under the previous order.
The clerk will report.
The Senator from Connecticut, Mr. Murphy, moves to discharge S.J. Res. 54, joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed foreign military sale of the Government of the United Arab Emirates of certain defense articles and services from the Committee on Foreign Relations.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm bringing before the Senate an opportunity for us to take a stand against the corruption of American foreign policy. The Senate will take a vote in just a moment to deny the President the ability to move forward with two arms sales, one to Qatar and one to the United Arab Emirates. I believe that this Senate should join Republicans and Democrats together in saying that any country that's willing to pay the president personally, to enrich our president personally, in order to receive favorable treatment from the United States of America in its foreign policy, or to receive national security secrets from the United States of America, shouldn't be able to do business as usual with this Congress or with this country. And so I want to tell you a story that is heartbreaking as it is aggravating. So we give the American president enormous power, and particularly we give the president enormous power when it comes to managing the foreign relations of this country. The president decides where we send arms. The president gets to negotiate peace treaties. The president decides how millions of troops are deployed all around the world. And we trust that the president is going to use those powers for good, that the president is going to use those authorities to protect the United States of America. But they are vast powers. They are immense powers. And so there is always the potential that those powers are going to be used for corrupt purposes, that instead of using those authorities in order to gain concessions from other nations that benefit the broad American public or benefit American national security, the president may use those powers in order to enrich himself personally. Our founding fathers actually thought a lot about this problem because they had watched their monarch, they had watched the King of England use the powers that he had in order not to protect the British people, but to amass enormous wealth. He used those powers both to control dissent and protest domestically, but he also used those powers in order to compel other nations and actors inside the empire to pay him tribute. President Trump has decided that he is going to use the powers that we have given him to demand the same kind of tribute that kings and monarchs demanded. And the reason that we have to stand together today to vote against these arms sales to Qatar and UAE is because, unfortunately, these two countries, who are admittedly often allies, important allies of the United States, have decided to comply with President Trump's request to pay him that tribute. Shortly before the president went to the Middle East, he did not dispense to the region his Secretary of State. Instead, he dispensed to the region his business partners. Just before the president made his first major foreign trip to the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and to Qatar, he sent his son and their business partner, who not coincidentally happens to be the son of Trump's Middle East envoy, to the United Arab Emirates. And their request was pretty simple. Their request was not that the UAE do something that would be in the interests of collective American security. Their request was that UAE invest $2 billion in Donald Trump's new crypto business, in particular his stablecoin venture. This is the President of the United States going to the UAE and asking a foreign government to invest $2 billion in his personal business. The company is called World Liberty Financial. On World Liberty Financial's website, it says the company is owned, the majority of the company is owned by Donald J. Trump. Now, this was a pretty exceptional request to make because his crypto business was brand new. At the time, it was a pretty minor player. And so a $2 billion investment from a country like UAE would vault World Liberty Financial into the stratosphere. And in fact, it did. When the UAE complied with that corrupt request, World Liberty Financial, the stablecoin that it issues, became the 5th biggest stablecoin in the world overnight. Now, the UAE felt like it had to comply with the president's request because they had things they wanted from the United States. First, they wanted a continuation of arms sales, including the sale of Chinook helicopters that we will be voting on today. But they wanted something more specific, something that they weren't able to get from the first Trump administration or from the Biden administration. They wanted some of our most vital, most significant national security secrets. They wanted to be able to get their hands on computer chip technology, the kind of technology that will power the next generation of AI. Now, we as a nation, again, based on bipartisan consensus, had been unwilling to give UAE that technology because it is a fairly open secret that the UAE has a very close, very cozy relationship with China. And there was a very real worry, there still is a real worry, that that technology, if transferred to the UAE, would be quickly transferred to China, allowing China to be able to outpace us, to outrun us in the race to advanced AI. But the UAE knew that there was a way to get what they wanted. There was a way to change the policy of the United States, and it was a $2 billion investment in Trump's business. And not coincidentally, just weeks after they announced that they were putting $2 billion into Trump's crypto business, his father, who, again, not coincidentally, is Trump's Middle East envoy, went back to the region and announced that they would be moving forward with the transfer of these computer chips to the UAE. $2 billion into Trump family's pockets, the most sensitive American technology that had been previously banned from going to the UAE being sent to the UAE. Apparently, we didn't make any demands that the UAE divest itself from its security relationship with China. Instead, what we demanded was that the UAE make a $2 billion investment in Donald Trump's business. As you can imagine, once the word was out that the Trump administration was for sale, other countries decided to get into the mix. Donald Trump apparently had taken a look at a luxury plane that the country of Qatar owned, reportedly the most luxurious plane in the world, gold plating, a spiral staircase designed by a famed French designer, and the president wanted it personally. And so he dispensed the Department of Defense, apparently, to go to the Qataris and ask them to give him the plane. Just like he had asked the UAE for a $2 billion investment in his business, a $2 billion investment that nobody else was going to give him, except for a foreign power over whom Donald Trump had leverage because of his role as president of the United States. He went to the Qataris and asked them to give him this jet because he liked it, because it was fancy, because he thought he deserved it, and he knew they couldn't say no. Why? Because the Qataris also have specific asks of the United States. More broadly, they were burned during Trump's first term when the Saudis and the Emiratis ganged up on the Qataris and effectively implemented an economic and political blockade on Qatar. The Trump administration, in the first term, effectively took the side of the Emiratis and the Saudis. That was devastating for the Qataris. And so, first and foremost, they wanted to make sure that never again would Trump abandon them if there was a contest like that in the Middle East. And so, when he asked for the plane, just based upon their desire to make sure they did not get abandoned again, they felt they had to say yes. But they also wanted an arms sale. And the arms sale they wanted was a groundbreaking arms sale. Never before has the United States been willing to sell our most sensitive drone technology into the Middle East. Weren't willing to transfer our most sensitive computer chips. We also weren't willing to send our most sensitive drone technology. Qatar wanted that drone technology. And once again, just like the UAE knew that they could get our most sensitive computer chip technology if they sent $2 billion to Donald Trump's business ventures, Qatar, having learned that lesson, realized that if they gave a massive gift to the president, maybe he would break with a bipartisan precedent not to send this sensitive drone technology into the Middle East, and guess what? They got what they wanted. The president has agreed to move forward with sending our most sensitive drone technology, the Predator drones, into the Middle East, selling them to Qatar. Not a coincidence that they are also willing to send him this jet. Now, I had the chance this morning to talk to the Secretary of Defense about this jet because one of the claims the administration has made is that the jet is actually being sent to the U.S. government. But we learned some important facts this morning. So it is true that right now the U.S. government is buying 2 new Air Force Ones. And it's true that that contract is expensive and it's taken a little bit longer than both Republicans and Democrats had hoped. But both those planes from Boeing are due for delivery sometime at the end of Trump's term. What we learned today is that this plane that's being gifted temporarily to the United States government is going to take several years to retrofit and will become available essentially at the exact same time that the 2 Boeing planes are made available. So we don't actually need this plane as a new Air Force One because the Boeings are still under contract and they are going to be ready simultaneously. But the Secretary of Defense is committed to accepting the gift of this plane and then spending upwards of $1 billion of taxpayer money in order to retrofit this plane. $1 billion that we don't need because we're already spending $4 billion on the 2 Boeings. So now instead of having 2 Air Force Ones, we're going to have 3 Air Force Ones. We don't need 3 Air Force Ones. But Trump is solving this problem. Because what he has said is that when he leaves office, he's taking this Air Force One with him. Now, that's never, ever happened before. We've never just given a president of the United States a gift on the way out the door. But we're going to spend $1 billion getting this plane ready. It effectively will not be used as an actual Air Force One because it won't be completed until the very end of his term. And then Trump is taking the plane, apparently, to his presidential library, but who knows? And so this gift is actually going to Donald Trump, not to the American taxpayers. The Department of Defense is effectively a straw purchaser. It'll hold the plane for a couple of years. It'll spend your taxpayer dollars to retrofit the plane, and then the plane will just be given to Donald Trump to take with him in his post-presidency. $2 billion to the UAE, from the UAE into the president's crypto venture, a plane that, when all is said and done, is probably going to be worth about $1.5 billion, straight transferred to Donald Trump personally. This is unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. Never has a president of the United States, while in office, solicited, sought, and accepted billions of dollars worth of investments in his private companies or gifts to him and his family. Remember, our founding fathers thought about this problem. They worried about this exact situation. A president using the vast power of the Article 2 authorities he is given in order to trade favorable American treatment for foreign countries in exchange for personal enrichment of the president. They literally wrote a clause into the Constitution which, clear as day, says that a president of the United States cannot accept gifts from a foreign prince, king, or nation. That is exactly what the president is doing. This plane is a gift. He advertises it as a gift that will be in the American public's hands for a nanosecond before it goes into his private hands. If we don't take a stand, if we don't act together against this unconstitutional corruption of our foreign policy, I don't know that we can ever get this genie back in the bottle. I understand that it is difficult for my Republican colleagues to stand up to this president. But we have an independent responsibility as a co-equal branch of government charged with upholding the Constitution to call out wrong when we see it, to call out illegality when we see it. This is wildly unconstitutional. This is wildly illegal. And so we have a chance today with these resolutions in order to make clear that we are not going to accept or make normal this kind of corruption of American foreign policy. Now, Mr. President, I will finish with this because my colleague from Maryland is going to add some remarks. I admit that these are imperfect vehicles. It's all part of the same story. Trump would not be moving forward with these arms sales if he wasn't getting what he wanted personally from these two countries. But I also admit that the UAE, and most especially Qatar, have been allies of the United States. We have worked together in our efforts, for instance, to combat terrorism in the region. Qatar specifically has at times been a heroic partner of the United States. We would never have been able to rescue thousands of Americans and American allies from Afghanistan without Qatar's help. Qatar has consistently acted as an interlocutor between warring and conflicting factions in the region. Qatar has taken risks on behalf of the United States. We, of course, have thousands of American troops and soldiers and airmen in Qatar today. And so what we need to say here is not that we are going to permanently pause our military relationships with these countries, but for the time being, these two nations are willing to pay the president tribute, we cannot endorse or condone business as usual. These are important partners of the United States in the region. They will be important partners in the future. But this is an exceptional moment where the corruption and our effort to stop the corruption has to take priority and has to take precedent. And so I'm going to vote for both of these resolutions while also still believing that we are going to have a continued important bilateral relationship with Qatar and with the UAE. But if we start to endorse and grease the wheels of this kind of corruption, then there'll be no end. Because once it becomes accepted, once it becomes implicitly endorsed by the United States Senate that foreign governments can put money into the personal treasury of the president in order to gain favorable treatment from the United States of America, that becomes the way our foreign policy works. And so I appreciate my colleagues' time and attention to this matter, and I encourage them to support these resolutions when they come up for a vote later this afternoon. I yield the floor.
From Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to start by thanking my friend and colleague, Senator Murphy, for shining a light on this issue of corruption. Because the corruption that we are seeing from President Trump is unprecedented in scale and scope in our nation's history. It's infecting our democracy here at home, and it's corrupting our foreign policy around the world. We will soon be debating here in the United States Senate what President Trump calls his big, beautiful bill. Well, it is a big bill, but it's only beautiful if you're a billionaire or a very wealthy American, because he gives those big tax breaks to very wealthy people at the expense of everybody else in America. We've heard of the cuts to Medicaid and food and nutrition programs, and the fact that even after that it will drive a huge upward hole in our deficit. But there's one billionaire that President Trump is especially focused on making sure does well, and that's himself and his family and his family's business. And we've seen a great example of that corruption here at home with the meme coin, right? This is the coin that Trump put together, and he said that he's going to reward the people who buy the most of this meme coin by meeting with him personally at his golf course in Virginia. And so people all over the world scurried to purchase that meme coin in order to get an audience with the president. Because having an audience with the president means you get a chance to influence the president. And many people from around the world, including China, purchased those meme coins to buy that influence. And people should understand that the president's business makes money, whether the value of that meme coin goes up or whether it goes down. Every time there's a transaction to buy or sell that meme coin, the Trump business makes money. So other people can get totally hosed, but it's a win-win for President Trump and his family. In fact, it's estimated that in the early days of launching this, they made about $350 million. So that's the meme coin here at home. What brings us to the floor today is how this personal corruption is infecting the foreign policy of the United States. Because all of us hope and expect that when a president of the United States goes overseas to conduct American foreign policy, they have the interests of America first. Donald Trump says it himself, America first. That's not what President Trump has foremost in his mind when he travels overseas. What he has foremost in his mind right now is the bottom line for his personal profit, literally selling the office of the presidency. You might as well open the White House and make it an Airbnb. So let's talk about the details of how this is unfolding and how it's hurting the United States of America. On his first major overseas trip, Donald Trump went to 3 countries in the Middle East, Gulf countries. Went to Saudi Arabia, he went to the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, and he went to Qatar. Now, normally before the President of the United States takes one of these important overseas trips, they send out the diplomats to help work out important U.S. foreign policy objectives and goals with these countries to make sure that the interests of the United States of America are put first. In the case of this trip to these 3 Gulf countries, again, the first major overseas trip President Trump took, it was his son, Eric Trump, who went out to the region 2 weeks in advance. And what did Eric Trump do when he was there? Was he talking about foreign policy? No. He was talking about doing deals for the Trump family business. And so let's zero in on some of the deals that he worked on. Let's start by what happened in Qatar, because it was about 2 weeks before President Trump arrived there that Eric Trump worked with Qatar to partner the Trump Organization on a $5.5 billion Trump-branded golf course and real estate development deal. It should be pointed out that Qatar has also invested over $1 billion in a private equity fund for Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in a deal announced in 2024 after Donald Trump's most recent election victory. And now, as Senator Murphy pointed out, then Trump asked Qatar to give him, as a gift, this jumbo jet plane to use as Air Force One and potentially to keep for later on as part of his presidential library. And so Qatar, for the reasons that Senator Murphy indicated, felt apparently compelled to comply with this wish from the President of the United States. The President of the United States has a lot of influence in the region. And Qatar has been on the losing end of that influence in the first Trump administration. And so Qatar gave Donald Trump, at Donald Trump's request, a $400 million jumbo jet, what the president calls the palace in the sky. It's complete with a 55-inch TV, leather sofas, wood paneling, the works. And during this whole period of time, Qatar has also wanted to make sure it establishes a solid relationship with the United States and specifically with the Trump administration. And the Trump administration had noticed a major arms sales to Qatar, $1.9 billion weapon package, complete with Predator drones, 500-pound bombs, and Hellfire 2 missiles. So all of this gets caught up together in the major corrupt deals that are being put forth in order to enrich the Trump family, not advance the national security interests of the United States. Now let me turn to the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, because in this case, the corruption is at least as bad, probably more so. So once again, in the case of the UAE, before President Trump went to the region, it wasn't the State Department emissaries that went out, it was Eric Trump on behalf of the Trump family businesses. In this case, it was a new cryptocurrency stablecoin enterprise launched by the Trump family called World Liberty Financial. Now, World Liberty Financial is 60% owned by the Trump family. As Senator Murphy pointed out, one of the co-founders is actually Zach Witkoff, a last name that you might know because his dad, Steve Witkoff, is Donald Trump, President Trump's major Middle East envoy, going to places like Qatar as part of the Middle East negotiations with both respect to Iran and Gaza. So 2 weeks before Donald Trump goes to the region, his son Eric Trump goes on behalf of the family business along with Zach Witkoff, the son of the president's special Middle East envoy. So what happens when Eric Trump, the president's son, goes to the UAE? Well, they soon after announced that MGX, which is a UAE government-backed investment firm, would use Trump's new stablecoin called USD1 for $1, to close a new $2 billion investment in the cryptocurrency exchange Binance. So by putting $2 billion into the Trump stablecoin enterprise, putting that into circulation, the UAE turned an unknown stablecoin company into one of the biggest players in the world overnight. Overnight, the value of that company shot up with the action that the UAE took with the $2 billion. And the Trump family stands to make tens of millions of dollars every year from that deal alone. Now, Mr. President, I doubt that the Emirati investment firm went with a Trump-branded cryptocurrency for its $2 billion investment because Eric Trump put together the best slide deck for the pitch meeting. Somehow I think it's because he was the son of the President of the United States who was going to be arriving in the UAE 2 weeks later. So I want everybody to hold that deal in their head. Just put a pin in it for a minute, right? Eric Trump, President's son, goes to the UAE 2 weeks before President Trump arrives and does this crypto deal, $2 billion crypto deal. So 2 weeks later, the President of the United States arrives in the UAE. And what happens? President Trump gives away some of the most sensitive, advanced American technology. In fact, the crown jewels of American AI technology and semicomputers. The previous administration, President Biden, had restricted the flow of this very sensitive AI technology to places like the UAE because of a fear of what's known as diversion, that technology would not be safe in the hands of the UAE without really important safeguards in place. Because the UAE has a partnership with the United States, but it also has very close relations with China, the PRC. And so there's been well-documented concern about the real risk that very sensitive American AI technology would go to China. I would also point out that the UAE has made it its ambition to become one of the AI leaders in the world, and so they obviously will benefit greatly from getting the very best technology, the highest compute power that the United States can provide them. Now, interestingly, it was the day before President Trump departed to the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia that the Trump administration rolled back the important safeguards the Biden administration had placed on the transfer of this very sensitive AI technology. They rolled it back as the president was about to take off to go visit the UAE. Now, this deal that was cut, where the United States agreed to lift its limitations on the transfer of this technology, really does compromise the national security interests of the United States. Mr. President, a group of us wrote a letter led by Senator Warren. It was signed by Leader Schumer, also by the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Reid, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Warner, Senator Coons, and others. And here's what we wrote. These deals greenlight the sale of sensitive U.S. technology in exchange for illusory promises of foreign investment. If completed, they will present an immediate threat to U.S. national security and, over the long term, may irreversibly erode U.S. leadership in artificial intelligence by offshoring American technology and jobs. So that's what the president did just 2 weeks after the UAE said it would invest $2 billion in the Trump family business crypto exchange, letting that skyrocket to very valuable levels. I will point out, Mr. President, that it wasn't only Democrats who have expressed concern about the risks of transferring this sensitive AI technology to the UAE. In fact, during the Biden administration, the Republican chairman of the House Select Committee on China wrote to the president, actually wrote to the president's then National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, expressing exactly these kind of concerns. It was a letter dated July 10th, 2024. It's a short letter. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that it be entered in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, here's an important thing for everybody to understand. When Eric Trump went 2 weeks before Donald Trump's trip, and when he did that deal where a UAE-owned company put $2 billion into the Trump family stablecoin business, that was with a company called MGX. The chairman of that company is a member of the royal family. His name is Sheikh Tahnoon. He's also known as TBZ. He's a real entrepreneur, and he does look out for the interests of the UAE. So he does this deal with Eric Trump, but guess what else he's the chairman of? He's the chairman of G42, which is the, again, Emirati state-owned business that cut the AI deal with the Trump administration. So the guy who's the chairman of the company that put $2 billion into the Trump family stablecoin business is also the chairman of the company G42 that was the beneficiary of Donald Trump's giveaway of very sensitive U.S. AI technology. Now look, when it comes to Sheikh Tahnoon, you know, I've met him. He's a good businessman. He was looking out for the interests of the UAE when he got that deal where the United States government will give the UAE all this AI technology. So he was looking out for the interests of the UAE. The problem is that it was President Trump who wasn't looking out for the interests of the United States of America. He was looking out for the interests of his family business and literally gave away this sensitive technology 2 weeks after the UAE invested $2 billion in the Trump family newly launched stablecoin. And at the same time, like in the Qatar situation, this was accompanied by a request from President Trump for a $1.3 billion arms sale to the UAE. Now, Mr. President, that arms sale is part of the overall corrupt bargain that the Trump administration struck with the UAE. It also ignores what the UAE is doing right now as we speak with respect to the terrible war and conflict in Sudan. Because the UAE has been sending weapons to an organization, a murderous organization called the Rapid Support Forces. The Rapid Support Forces have been engaged in all sorts of atrocities. And during the Biden administration, President Biden met with the UAE leaders and asked for assurances that they would no longer be providing weapons to this murderous group and thought he had received those assurances. But the reality is, right at the end of the Biden administration, at my request, I asked for a briefing, and it turns out that the U.S. has determined that the UAE is continuing to provide weapons to this murderous group, which the United States government has found is committing genocide in Darfur as we speak. And so on top of all the corruption that's part of this deal, we have the Trump administration greenlighting an arms transfer to the UAE, at the same time the UAE is transferring weapons to a murderous group in Sudan that is committing genocide. And here's what the State Department's own assessment says. The Rapid Support Forces and allied militias have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, and deliberately targeted women and girls from certain ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. Those same militias have targeted fleeing civilians, murdering innocent people escaping conflict, and preventing remaining civilians from accessing life-saving supplies. So there are lots of reasons we shouldn't go forward with this arms sale, partly because it's part of an overall corrupt deal with the Trump administration, but also because of the UAE's ongoing actions. So let me really close with this, Mr. President. We do expect the President of the United States, when he travels overseas, to be looking out for American interests. In this case, it's very clear President Trump was going out to look out for his own interests. In the case of the Middle East, it doesn't even seem that he raised the issue of the genocide in Sudan during his trip to the UAE while he was following up on the corrupt deals. And the president also, I think people will remember, said he was going to end the war in Gaza on day one, that he was going to bring back the hostages and end the absolute awful humanitarian disaster we're witnessing right now, with literally hundreds of thousands, not millions, of innocent Palestinians dying of starvation, civilians. But instead of looking at working the Gaza issue or these other foreign policy priorities, the president was there for himself. And it's sending a terrible message. Other countries are getting that message. Reports say that Vietnam is making way for a Trump Gulf complex to get lower tariffs, and that Serbia is demolishing a historic building to fast-track a Trump hotel in Belgrade. Mr. President, we cannot allow our foreign policy to be corrupted in this way. And the one way we can send that signal and that message right now is by voting yes on these joint resolutions of disapproval on these arms sales, because they're part of the overall corrupt package. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I now yield the floor to my friend, the senator from Vermont.
Well, let me thank Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on this important issue, and thank Senators Murphy, Kaine.
Senator from Vermont
To me, I think.
is recognized.
Thank you. Let me thank Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on this issue, as well as Senators Murphy, Kaine, Merkley, and Schatz, who are leading the effort to make sure that we pass these joint resolutions of disapproval. Mr. President, joint resolutions of disapproval are about denying military assistance to countries who break U.S. and international law. That's all they're about. Respect the law. Don't break the law. These resolutions before us today would prevent multi-billion-dollar arms sales to both the UAE and Qatar, precisely because both of these countries have violated U.S. and international law, and allowing these sales to go forward would be a dereliction in the duties of the United States Senate. Let me take a moment to say a few words about these countries who would receive billions of dollars in military aid. As it happens, both of these countries are strongly authoritarian, anti-democratic governments that repress any forms of dissent. We talk a lot about protests here in the United States. Well, they don't have protests in Qatar. They don't have protests in UAE. You protest, you go to jail. These are countries who exploit migrant labor. And these are countries who treat women as third-class citizens. In the UAE and Qatar, where the ruling families are worth many hundreds of billions of dollars. There are no elections. There is no freedom of the press. There is no freedom of speech. The ruling families of both of these countries are among the wealthiest and most powerful oligarchs in the entire world. Mr. President, in the UAE's case, in recent years they have provided extensive military assistance to the so-called Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, the RSF. This paramilitary group started the bloody civil war in that country and is responsible for numerous horrific atrocities that, among other things, have contributed to the famine and starvation that is currently taking place in that country. In January, the U.S. State Department concluded that the RSF, supported by the UAE, the country who would get weapons if we are not successful in opposing that, has committed ethnic cleansing. I'm not quite sure why we would support arms to a country involved in ethnic cleansing. Clearly, the actions of the UAE are in violation of U.S. and international law. There is no reason, therefore, that we should be providing billions more in arms sales to this country. The other arms sale we are objecting to today would go to Qatar, a country which has also broken U.S. and international law. Qatar has channeled hundreds of millions of dollars into a wide variety of political organizations in the Middle East, including the Hamas terrorist organization. And I am no understanding as to why anybody in the United States Senate would be voting to support a nation providing military aid to a nation that has provided financial assistance to Hamas. And while Qatar deserves credit for attempting to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza, it should also be noted that the political leaders of Hamas have resided in Qatar for many years. But, Mr. President, there is another very serious problem regarding military aid to both Qatar and the UAE. Both of these countries, in a variety of ways, have attempted to corrupt our political system and the President of the United States in violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution and United States anti-corruption laws. I find it interesting, as I'm sure millions of Americans do, that President Trump's first major foreign policy trip was not to Europe to reaffirm our longstanding alliances with other democratic countries. It was not to visit our neighbors in Canada or Mexico. No, instead he chose, on his very first foreign trip, to go to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Now, why was that? Why would the President of the United States go to visit countries that are run by oligarchs, are strongly anti-democratic, and oppress the rights of women? Kind of funny places for a president, the so-called leader of the free world, to visit on his first foreign policy trip. Well, I think we now know the answer to that question. Trump went for the money and to secure business deals for himself, his family, and his cronies. Shortly before Trump's visit to the Gulf, an investment firm owned by the UAE announced that it would use the so-called stable coin issued by World Liberty Financial to facilitate a $2 billion cryptocurrency deal. World Liberty Financial just happens to be 60% owned by Trump and his family. So by making this deal, the UAE was effectively giving the Trump family $2 billion in cash to invest as it wishes and keep the proceeds. Even conservative estimates of such a sum would generate somewhere around $85 million in profit a year for the Trump family. Think about that. The UAE is directly giving the Trump family some $85 million a year. Now, what did the UAE get in return? They don't give away $85 million for nothing. In Qatar's case, that government announced during a Trump's visit that they would give him a $400 million luxury jet for use as Air Force One, which he plans to keep for personal use after he leaves office. Necessary security and communications updates will cost the taxpayers of our country millions of dollars and take several years. So if this plane is actually ever used by the U.S. government, it will only be for a year or two. But that is really not Donald Trump's concerns, because he gets to keep this flying palace, this $400 million plane, for use for himself and his family forever. Not a bad gift, $400 million plane. Once again, it is pretty obvious what Trump gets from this deal. Not quite so clear how the American people benefit. Qatar also announced that it was just coincidentally financing a $5.5 billion Trump-branded golf course and invested another $1 billion in Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's company just for good measure. Now, what are these authoritarian governments getting in return for the many hundreds of millions of dollars they are funneling to Trump and his family? Well, it could be the arms sales we are talking about today. It could be other policy priorities of these governments. For example, just 10 days after the UAE crypto deal with Trump, he lifted restrictions on the export of advanced AI microchips to the UAE, which had previously been limited over security concerns. That delivered on a long-standing UAE priority worth billions of dollars to its leaders. But the deeper truth is we really don't know what these authoritarian foreign powers are getting for their bribes. But we shouldn't have to be asking these questions. This is precisely why the Constitution of the United States and U.S. law make it illegal for presidents to accept gifts from foreign powers. Mr. President, the truth is that the autocratic leaders of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have perfected the art of channeling money to Trump and his family as a way to buy influence and get what they want. Our job is to say no to providing military aid to one country which is involved in horrific policies which are resulting in famine and starvation, and another country which is making huge amounts of money from side deals with the president. Let us support these resolutions, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Oregon.
President, I ask unanimous consent to grant floor privileges to my interns for their shadow days as follows: Leslie Maldonado on June 17th, Emma Singleton on June 24th, Malia Perry on July 8th, Kunga Wilson on July 10th, Catherine Lackey on July 15th, Salma Sheikh on July 17th, Delaney Jones on July 22nd, Vincent Shoeships on July 24th, Abraham Barrow on July 29th, and Uthan Ethan Ubisalan, on July 31st.
Without objection.
Thank you. President Trump is engaged in massive corruption. There is a government for sale sign flashing its lights on the lawn of the White House. He's selling access and influence through two types of crypto coins. A meme coin, which is a digital baseball card, and he invited the 220 people who gave him the most money for these digital baseball cards, called a meme coin, to come to a dinner where we feed them at his fancy Virginia golf club, held 2 weeks ago. And he said, oh, and the top 25 buyers of my meme coin, those buyers will get some other special access, a special tour. 220 people gave the president $148 million, approximately. And they didn't give him $148 million in order to have a digital baseball card. They gave it because he was conveying that this would give you access and influence. As the president of Freight Technologies, Inc. said, I bought $2 million of these coins. I'm hoping to buy $20 million of these coins because I want the president to change a policy related to freight transportation between Mexico and the United States of America. That CEO was saying out loud what everyone else understood, that the president was selling access and influence. And that's not all. There's another type of Trump coin, crypto coin, that is inducing this corrupt practices. It's called a stable coin. And a company associated with United Arab Emirates said, you know, we're going to buy $2 billion of your coins, and guess what? You get to keep the value of everything earned on that $2 billion deposit. Even at 4%, that's $80 million a year. And what did UAE want? UAE wanted advanced AI chips in order to have an advanced AI center in the Arab Emirates. Well, what did we see transpire? UAE repeatedly advocated for having access to these chips that the United States had previously said were a security risk. Then a company closely associated with UAE buys $2 billion of Trump's USD1 stablecoin. And then President Trump says, oh, you know what? You can have these AI chips. After all, we'll help you establish an advanced AI processing artificial intelligence center in Abu Dhabi, one of the UAE Emirates. That's corruption, laid out as black and white as you could ever see it. This is incredible. This is what we expect of very poor, impoverished countries with dictators running the place, taking a cut of everything. But instead, it's the President of the United States doing it. And our founders said this should never be allowed. Hamilton noted the reason that there is an emoluments clause in the Constitution. He said in Federalist 22, he said, many mortifying examples of the prevalency of foreign corruption in Republican governments. So here were our founders putting together this series of checks and balances, separation of powers between a judiciary, an executive, and a legislative branch. But they knew it could all be corrupted if you had an executive, that is a president, who could be bought. Well, folks, we have a president who is being bought, who is advertising it to the world, and we haven't acted to stop it. Our founders acted. They put a clause into the Constitution that said, no person holding any office of profit or trust under them, that of course included the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, all of us here who are elected, shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Well, MGX, the head of MGX, is the National Security Advisor of the United Arab Emirates. This company is absolutely intertwined with this foreign government. Our Constitution forbids this type of gift to a president or a vice president or any one of us. So here is the fact. We are right now debating a bill dealing with cryptocurrencies. So this is the time to debate and vote on an amendment that bans these corrupt practices. And for that reason, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of Amendment 2307, post-closure, that the pending Amendment 2310 be set aside so I may offer my Amendment 2349, which would stop the corruption in stable coins for any elected official, federal official of the United States of America.
Is
Mr.
there
President.
objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina? South Carolina, sorry, brother.
No problem, brother. Reserving the right to object. I think it's pretty rich for the party of Biden to talk about improprieties. I object.
Objections heard.
Mr. President, I hear an objection from my friend and colleague, the head of the Banking Committee. But would my friend and colleague explain why we shouldn't, while we are on a cryptocurrency bill, not consider and debate an amendment to honor the emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution?
My good friend on the other side of this issue, it is.
Senator from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's pretty clear that the underlying assumption is that there's already something nefarious going on, and I simply object to casting aspersions towards the President of the United States, particularly given the fact that this is the party, not Jeff, but the party that had cocaine in the White House, that had a problem with Hunter Biden's laptop. My point is, I'm not going to cast aspersions on the President of the United States without any clear evidence that any law has been broken, and I do not believe that there has been.
Well, to my colleague,
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
thank you, Mr. President. I asked to be recognized. We're in the middle of a series of presentations here.
You recognize you.
You're recognized.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I could understand if my colleague was objecting because that amendment only covers one type of cryptocurrency that is being used in this fashion. And therefore, I'll present a different option, which is to say we should address both the sale of meme coins as a way to profit from people wanting to give us money, and we should also cover the stable coins as well. And so this broader amendment is a more comprehensive way, regardless of what conclusions you might have about President Trump currently, a broader way to ensure as we go forward, this body and the executive branch, the House down the hall, will not be corrupted by us making personal money by selling something like a stable coin or a meme coin, a digital baseball card, a way for people to essentially channel us cash pretending to buy a digital baseball card. So I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of Amendment 2307, post-cloture, that the pending Amendment 2308 be set aside so I may offer my Amendment 2350, which more broadly covers the set of corrupting risks that we would be addressing, not just for the executive branch, but for the legislative branch as well.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
I object.
Objections heard.
Mr. President, I'm disappointed. I was very present when the majority leader said on this bill there will be an open amendment process. And we made it very clear that this was one of the issues that we felt we should be debating while we are in a cryptocurrency bill. There are other amendments that should be considered as well. One of them is to stop a form of scam that bypasses a bank teller by getting older folks to think they're wiring money to perhaps a nephew or grandchild in distress, but instead of wiring the funds, they go and get digital coins at an ATM as instructed, but in fact, they're just giving the money to crooks overseas. That amendment should be considered. There are other amendments that address creating more sideboards so that this bill, which purports to regulate an industry, actually regulates it in an effective fashion rather than essentially endorsing an unregulated industry, which is what, in sum, this bill is currently. So I am disappointed. I would, as I asked earlier, for the majority leader to honor his previous commitment to have an open amendment process so that we can pursue the people's work fighting for a better America, including ending corruption in cryptocurrencies. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to oppose the two resolutions that we are about to vote on. What they are is they have to do with arms sales to Qatar and UAE. These flawed resolutions aren't really about arms sales to our allies in Qatar or UAE. If they were, the discussion would be about how Qatar is one of our designated major non-NATO allies, how it hosts the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, and how it is our 12th largest foreign military sales customer. It would be about how the UAE has fought alongside the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq, is a participant in the global coalition to defeat ISIS, and is working against Iran and its terror proxies. And the debate would mention that the UAE was the first Arab state to join the Abraham Accords when it normalized relations with Israel in 2020. The discussion would be about how these proposed sales will support the national security objectives of the United States by improving the security of two allies that continue to be important forces for stability in the Middle East. And we would talk about how these agreements will lay the foundation for investment, innovation, and good-paying U.S. jobs that will boost our economy. But no, these joint resolutions do not conduct oversight or provide congressional disapproval. Instead, they make arms sales to some of our closest allies in the Middle East about partisan politics. As such, I would urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I object to the resolutions and urge a no vote. And Mr. President, I yield back all time. Request to proceed to the vote.
All time is yielded back. The motion is on the table to discharge SJ Res 53. Was yes, but it's not. Second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Ms. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young,